Folks, hockey is back, and that means that the Canucks internet sphere is in a buzz about analytics. It happens every single year. Some sort of reputable analytics person will put out their projections, in this case, Dom at The Athletic, and everyone will sort of go wild and be like, you're saying the Canucks aren't a playoff team. You know, this team that didn't make the playoffs last year and made a few minor changes. You're saying they're not a playoff team. And obviously I'm being a little facetious here, but let's go into the analytics here because I want to actually talk about a few different metrics and see, are us as Canucks fans overvaluing the additions that we made? Are we overvaluing Bruce Boudreau? Maybe, overvaluing the impact, the negative impact that maybe Travis Green had on this team, or are the analytics undervaluing those things when maybe that is maybe we should be waiting the last half of last season a little bit more than the first half of last season when things went really poorly, right? So let's take a look at the Athletics post and what they made today. Now on Twitter, the only things the people on Twitter see are this screenshot, right? They don't see the actual article that comes with it. And the article is interesting. Maybe not worth paying for, but I do have a subscription, so I'll read a little snippet here as well. But this is basically the snapshot, right? And there's going to be a few things that stand out immediately. First, top right corner, you're seeing points projection, 91.7 points. The Canucks finished with 92 points last year. So basically they're saying their rate are going to be the exact same as last year. Now we can look at that and say, well, I think they were better than their points might have said last year, but I digress. Playoffs percentage, 49%. The average person looks at this and says, 49% is less than 50. They say we're not making the playoffs. Folks, 49% is a coin flip. And with where this team is, a coin flip may be a little on the lower side. What are we going to say? Maybe we think they have a 65% chance of making it off our estimates, maybe being, and then maybe we're a bit biased, a bit homery. 50-50 is where this team is. And for a team that's only made the playoffs once in the last few years and didn't make a ton of changes over the offseason, maybe that's not too unreasonable if we're looking at purely a numbers perspective. Now, keep in mind where these numbers come from. Their model at The Athletic takes the last 3 years into account for all of these players. It's basically, it looks at all of the players. It's not like, oh, the Canucks were bad last year, so they're going to be bad this year. They ignore that. They look at the individual players and they say, okay, JT Miller over the last 3 years. Now it's weighted average. So last year is worth more than the year before, which is worth more than the year before that. Has been worth 2.4 wins, which if we look down at the bottom is between a top and a star player, which I think is fair. He might regress a little bit, but that's the example. And you look at that over the course of the last while. Jason Dickinson in the negatives, probably fair, right? And then from that, they build a roster and, based on these metrics, how many points are they projected to get? Now, people are going to look at this and say, okay, well, Elias Pettersson, third line. What's that about, right? Well, I mean, they're putting the lines based on how they were in training camp, at least in the first preseason game, which is Pettersson, Kuzmenko, Mikheyev, which is a good line, and it would be an A+ third line if you look right next to my face here. Obviously, they're not going to be getting third line minutes, but I think the three centers are playing on different lines: Miller, Horvat, and Pettersson as of right now, and they'll probably be splitting ice time fairly evenly. So I don't think this is the reason that the playoffs only 49% on this analytically. But I mean, let's see. Is there anything here that we can argue? I think Andrei Kuzmenko is the real wild card here. Being at 0.4 wins of value, basically. He could be worth that. Obviously, there's no real sample to go off of. He's looked good from our limited viewing, and the clips that Vancouver Canucks share on Twitter. But he might be better than this, right? He might be worth 2 wins, right? He might be equivalent to like a Connor Garland on this chart, or maybe a Brock Besser or somewhere along those lines. And that right there is a couple more points, right? So I think that's a fair place to say, maybe the Canucks will have some upgrade. I also look at Jason Dickinson at -0.5 on the right wing, and I think there's quite a reasonable chance that he gets pulled out of the lineup entirely, right? I would much rather maybe have a Dakota Joshua there on that right wing spot, who maybe isn't worth more. Maybe he's worth a little more, like analytically wise, but I think he would bring more to the team. The defense is obviously, the right side is just it's all replacement value, right? And that left side, Quinn Hughes is carrying. Now, if we see things move around and Quinn Hughes slots over to the right side first pair, that adds more ice time. That could make a slight difference as well. And then obviously Spencer Martin has no really known value. He's only played like a handful of NHL games. I think it was like 7 games last year. So there's not enough value to assign to that. Now, where I want to really draw your attention is to this thing on the right-hand side, this sort of bell curve, right, of where the Canucks could reasonably finish. Likely rank 4th in the division. That seems pretty fair. I think in all of our talks, especially on Canucks After Dark with Clay, we've said, well, I could see the Canucks going as high as 2, right, if the Kings really fall off and the Oilers fall off. But, I mean, we're really going to be talking about the Flames and the Oilers being near the top. And then you got the Kings, you got Vegas, and you got Vancouver all competing in that 3 to 5 spot. So likely rank of 4 makes decent sense to me. And if you're 4th in the division, that does give you about a 50% chance to make the playoffs. Keep in mind, playoff bar was like 97 points last year, right? So they need to add quite a bit. 24% chance of being in the bottom 10. If that happens, it's a disaster. But also a 20% chance that they make the division final, 3% chance they make the cup final, 8% chance they make the conference final. Again, seems pretty fair for a team that hasn't had any semblance of playoff success, except for sort of a weird bubble scenario. But you look at the actual bell curve here, and you look at that 95. 95 is sort of the historical playoff benchmark, right? 22% chance that they finish between 95 and 100 points, 15% chance 100 to 105, 7 to 1% chance they finish at 115. I think you can take that right off the list. But if you add that up, 22 plus 15, 37 plus 7 is, oh my goodness, 43, 44, and then 2 and 1. So make it 47% chance that they finish with 95 points or higher. And that's typically where the playoff bar is. And I would say, that's pretty fair. And I want to go to this, we're going to compare this to some other metrics shortly, but I want to bring up what the actual article said. Quote, the model does not account for coaching effects explicitly, only implicitly with results during the tenure. This means it includes last year's 57 games under Boudreau, but it also includes the team's time under Travis Green prior to that. It's not as simple as cutting out that prior data. It is valuable toward knowing a player's worth, and it's also not as simple as applying a boost based on last year's sample either. It's complicated without knowing what is and isn't luck. But for those at home who aren't happy with Vancouver's bearish projection, it's worth checking in just how big the Boudreau effect was last year. Looking at the most important players on the team, their value under Boudreau was 0.4 wins stronger on average than what they were projected for back in December when he was hired. Some of that is already accounted for. The team's projected true talent has taken a jump since, but even that is 0.3 wins less on average than what the team managed under Boudreau. So that would account for an extra 5 wins for the team. So if you think that Boudreau that this team is the team that they were under Boudreau and is entirely not the team that they were under Travis Green, then that puts them right on track to be that 100-point team, right? 5 extra wins, that's 102 points. That's a playoff team, easy peasy. However, do we think that the Vancouver Canucks are entirely the team that they were under Boudreau when they weren't entirely the team they were under Travis Green? I'm sure it falls somewhere in the middle, maybe even leaning the Boudreau way. Maybe that is worth a couple more wins, but they also say that doesn't account for likely regression and is far too aggressive. No coach is worth 5 extra wins. Now, I don't have anything to back that up. It would seem like a lot for a coach to be worth 5 extra wins. Now, we might be saying 5 extra wins over Travis Green, which I think is more reasonable. If you think Travis Green is maybe worth -3 wins and Boudreau's worth +2 wins, then I could see how a coach might be worth 5 wins if it's really that big of a jump that we're seeing. But it does point to Vancouver being a good bet to exceed these projections. Whether it's enough for a playoff spot remains to be seen. And I think that's fair, right? If anyone's a good bet to exceed their projections, which are purely numbers based, I think the Canucks are maybe one of those teams, right? There is some nuance here. But if the Canucks do make the playoffs this year, and let's say they have 95 points, and everyone goes back and says, you said they weren't going to make the playoffs, 49%. Yeah, it's 49% that they would, though, right? Like, that's 50-50. That's what percentages are. It's odds, right? Speaking of odds, let's take a look at some other projections. Puck Luck Analytics, this is a kind of boring graph because nothing's actually happened in the year. They project the Vancouver Canucks at 95 points, which is right on that playoff bar and good for fourth. With they have Vegas really high up there, though, and I kind of doubt that. There's also this projections from 2 months ago before we knew, like, Leonard would be out and Nolan Patrick and all these other guys. Let's look at some other odds. Bleacher Report has some odds for teams to win the Stanley Cup. Vancouver Canucks at 19th best odds, 45-1. Now, part of that might be the team has no playoff experience, so if any team gets in, maybe they're a little bit less likely to win the Stanley Cup. But I think showing them at 19, is pretty fair, right? Below New Jersey seems odd to me. But either way, Vegas is usually pretty good at this, right? Let's go to the NHL prop odds. So this was last updated just a week ago. And this is odds on teams to make the playoffs. And the Vancouver Canucks, you'll see, are down here at yes, minus 130 or no, plus 100. Now, what does that mean? That means if you bet $130 on the Vancouver Canucks to make the playoffs, and they do, you would make $100 of profit. No is a perfect 50-50 coin flip. So if you bet $5, you'd win $5 if you were right. Now, what does that actually mean for percentage odds? Because obviously these numbers aren't the same. They're taking a cut out of that, right? That extra minus 30 is all Vegas's cut. That's where they make their money. So at minus 130, that would imply that the Vancouver Canucks have 56.5% odds to make the playoffs. Now, at the 100 of not making the playoffs, that implies a 50% chance of not making the playoffs. So if we say they have a 50% chance of not making it and a 56.5% chance of making it, let's cut it somewhere in the middle and say Vegas assumes that the Canucks have about a 53.3% chance of being a playoff team, which ain't that far off from 49%, which ain't that far off from 95 points. So I think, we can look at the analytics and say the Canucks are better than the analytics will say, and that remains to be seen. I think we are in for a wild ride. Nonetheless, it's going to be very exciting. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Where do you think the Canucks will end up points-wise? Personally, I'm right in that sort of like 93 to 99 range. I could see things going really wrong and them missing. I could also see things going pretty smoothly, being in the race till the end and maybe squeaking in with, by 5 points or something along those lines. I want to know what you think. Let me know in the comments. Leave a like on this video. Make sure you're subscribed. We got post games coming up October 12th when the season starts. I will see you then. Have a good one.